So welcome to the 4-hour article draft intro session. This is a short intro session to let you know what will be coming up in the next few weeks and how to prepare. Just a reminder that CSU Writes, we work across the career span. So for those of you who are early stages and you're doing your grad work and building out proposals or chapters of theses or dissertations, this works well for that. It also works great if you are senior faculty, if you are well established in your field and are moving towards full professor. So we work with all. And as part of a CSU writing community, we have some reminders that are just rooted in our principles of community. We put this together with our Office of Inclusive Excellence with Shannon Archibald-Ingle. And just we pulled out the writing community or the community guide reminders that are just really helpful for writers who come together. So you could hear people talking about what they were working on, but also sharing a bit about maybe how they struggle or things that they're working to overcome. And in those moments, we just know that we don't share out what other people are sharing about themselves. This is a version of confidentiality, that these are places where we can talk through writing challenges. So this workshop has 3 parts. It has an intro session, which we're here for right now, but then the 2 drafting sessions. And those are the ones that I want to spend some time really explaining in this intro session on how they work. But they're paced segments. They're 25 minutes of writing and 5 minutes of break. So we use a version of the Pomodoro method to break those down. And so they're timed. You can participate, by the way, in person if you'd like, or virtually. So you can do either. I'm actually sitting in the Laurie Student Center right now, but given that every single person who is attending decided to attend on Zoom, I suspect that means that Zoom might be the most popular way to an approach to it. All right. So this is built out of techniques that we talk about in the Write for Speed workshop. Some of you have attended those workshops in the past. We don't have one for this semester, but if you practice these very kind of simple methods that I'm going to give you in a moment, it'll be easy to understand what we do in that workshop. And what that does is the Write for Speed workshop, we untangle generative writing from editing. And when we generate new content, when we're drafting things out, we are using a certain area of our brain that's connected to language and in our prefrontal cortex. But when we're doing editing, we're still working with language, but we're using a different portion that focuses on critique and assessment and other kinds of connections to language. And when we try to do both of them together, we can sometimes get bunged up or stall out, or it makes it very hard. So sometimes when people talk about having writer's block or sitting down and looking at the blank page and not knowing where to go, that's kind of what they're maybe trying to do, is that they're trying to generate at the same time that they're trying to edit, and it can stymie them. So we practice in that workshop a write quickly, kind of draft it out quickly, and then edit slowly strategies, so that you're just aware of what you're doing, and it's an awareness of, in this moment, I'm going to draft something and put down as much as I know about this topic, just knowing that it's going to be messy, and then I'm going to go back and then I'm going to clean it up. So I can use those. I'm not multitasking in the same session. I'm focusing on generating, and then I'm coming back and I'm cleaning it up. And our writing experiences, as you heard even in the introductions earlier, are super varied. We come up with multiple strategies and things that work. And so it's really helpful for us to have a group, a community that helps share what their strategies are and what's been helpful for them, and being able to write more quickly and separate out those generative from the editing tasks. So a little bit of the history of this. In 2022, 2023, we did some test and experimental sessions, and then we piloted the workshop. And that should say scoring, I think, in 2020, or spring 2023. For whatever reason, it says soaring, which probably to be sort of soaring. I don't know, it's still not spelled correctly. All right. But summer 2022, the goal was to do a 2-hour article draft. Again, this was a workshop that I had been inspired by Steve Dalton's 2-hour article search. The talk, by the way, that he gave at CSU was a 3-hour talk. I just want to say he could talk for 3 hours about a 2-hour article search, but that was the thing, right? So it's always going to be longer than you think it's going to be. So I thought, well, let's see if we can draft out an article in 2 hours. So it was a cross-campus team from cell molecular biology and civil and environmental engineering and folks from Denver and other county folks who they were on a team and they tried, drafting out an article together in 2 hours. And I, as a single author, did my experiment of seeing, can I draft out an article in 2 hours? And what we found was that we couldn't. We got 700 to 1,500-ish words down that summer in the first session. So what we did was we added another session the next week. We just added it to our calendars. And we found that second session, we got pretty close to having our articles drafted-ish and out. Not out the door, not submitted, but not submittable quality yet. But that if you're looking for a draft that you can then go through and edit, it seems to be like 2-hour sessions, you can do it. But the preparation is pretty intensive. You have to really know what it is that you're going to be structuring out, where things are going to go. You have to have your data ready. You have to have your quotations from any texts. You have to have your literature review sorted. So if you think about all the parts and pieces of an article, if that's what you're writing, or some of you I know are going to be working on proposals or different types of documents, if you think about what goes into that genre and how many words and how long they need to be, you'll kind of get a sense of and break it down what it is that you're going to have to prep in advance of attending the next workshop when we do our first 2-hour session. And so we did do a 4-hour session in fall of 2022 and then in spring 2023. And then we did present on our data and talk about the nature of this workshop for other graduate students and other folks who might want to be using it on their campuses. So this is our timeline. We start that 2-hour session. And again, they're timed segments of writing. And that first, you just kind of early bird jump onto Zoom, or if you're here early, grabbing, coffee and hanging out. And then we start promptly at noon. And we have this reminder of the timeline, talking about the writing pace. And then we start the segment 1 and we have 25 minutes. And so you can select how you want to structure out. And that structure goes through the same. We have segment 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're done with those 2 hours. We have breaks in between where you can post some notes where you want to pick up again on that section. If you're kind of putting it aside until later, maybe you want to kind of have a little bit on all of your sections, your intro, your, lit, your methods, your discussion, however it is that you're organizing your article. Maybe you want to do just a little bit, 25 minutes each space, and then come back the next week and kind of add to that and fill in. Maybe you want to have your intro, lit review, whatever your sections are, you want to have a couple of those sections done by the end of that first session. And then we repeat this exact same process for the second week. So you have a week in between the 2 sessions to go and do some additional prep to kind of look and kind of tinker and maybe edit through and fine tune some things. And it's pretty astonishing how much you can get written within 2 to 4-hour sessions when you're highly prepared. And again, that preparation is important. So that workshop preparation, I've got some tips for you. I would identify, if you don't know where you're submitting, and again, if you're doing something other than an article, then, find where it is that you're going to be submitting, what you're going to be doing. But if you're looking for submission and you haven't identified what the structure is going to be, what type of article you're writing, first, just make sure that you have a sense of that. Like, what's the purpose of the piece that you're going to be writing and who's going to be reading it? Purpose and audience. And I would take a look and make sure that you are clear on the structure. How do you want to structure out those pieces? If you're new to this type of writing, if you haven't written an article for that journal before, if you haven't written a curriculum, if you haven't written certain types of things, just check out a couple models and make sure that you're clear on the structure. It helps because when you're there in the 2-hour drafting sessions, you want to be focused on drafting and getting one word out after the other as clearly as possible, right? But just as quickly as possible. You don't want to be thinking about the structure, and you don't want to be hemming and hawing and thinking about like, well, maybe I want it to, talk about this in a different section. You just want to be clear on what's going to be going on. So the lengths, the sections, the connections, and the readability, kind of take a look at what that looks like in another article. If you have data, you want to make sure that you have that analyzed in advance, or you have a clear sense of the interpretations that you're going to be making, and that you have your data structured. My recommendation, and this would be something that they found in our test kind of group, our experimental group, was that they had most of their figures done. They didn't have all of their figures done. And then when it came down to it, between the first workshop and the second workshop, I think there were some questions about what data they really were going to be including. So there were still some questions on the team. If you're not working in a team environment, it's just you might just want to be making sure that you've got your figures and any tables or other kinds of illustrations that are going to be used in your draft, that those are already there and kind of plugged in. That way you can write around them, right? You can explain them, you can make connections to them. So again, prepare those figures tables. Reading the relevant literature, I don't know what it looks like in your field. It can be massive for some fields, medicine, medical fields. You might have a lot of citations. It could be for social sciences. You also have a fair amount, or in my field, I have 10 to 20-ish that per article that I would be expected to have included, to have demonstrated kind of connections. But so I need to have that read. I need to have a sense of what's there, what I'm going to be drawing on in order to be able to include that. Key quotations, super helpful, by the way. You have a sense of what it is that you're going to be bringing forward. I'm always overly ambitious and always have too much, and I'm always cutting back. So you can be ambitious, but just make sure that you've got a sense of what it is that you would be pulling from that relevant literature. And this is for your sections, not what's in other people's work, but what sections and subsections are you going to be putting together in your own piece? Again, identify what it is that you want to be putting in your article. And if you haven't practiced Write for Speed techniques, I highly recommend practicing a few times a week. It doesn't take very long. You can set aside 10 minutes at the beginning of a writing session. It's a great way to practice. And just set a timer for 5 minutes and write quickly, just kind of brain dump what it is that you know about the topic and you're writing on in that session, and then stop, and then set a timer for 5 minutes, and then go back and edit it. Kind of look at what's there, pull out redundancies, any, information that's not working, things that need to be reordered or rearranged, make notes on what you need to go and find. Additionally, do you need more data? Do you need to have more review and literature? So it's really helpful to practice those Write for Speed techniques at the beginning of a session. And then during the session itself, just be prepared to write on all your content, your methods, findings before that workshop. Again, that's for people who are writing in IMRAD structures, but I don't. And so I just make sure that everything's how I want it, right? Like bring in all the stuff. Avoid rabbit holes. Make sure that you mark that impulse of, like, for me, it's tangents. And if I'm in a generative mode, I might say, oh, that would be a cool idea to include. It's best if you only have 2 hours, avoid the tangents, avoid kind of going down those rabbit holes. Yes. Do we have a printable guide? Yes, I will be sending out guides via email. So if you signed up for this, you'll be getting the weekly emails with tips and advice, and a guide on how to write for speed. So thank you for the question. That's a great one. During the writing session, and this is, by the way, the most controversial advice in the 2-hour or 4-hour, article workshop, which is to, during the writing session, if you can, keep your fingers to the keyboard, pen to the page, and just keep it moving forward. That's part of what we practice also in the Write for Speed workshop, but so that you're not, and you can just think about it. For those of you who have practiced and attended that session, you keep your fingers to the keyboard, and if you try not to hit the delete button, right? You try not to erase or go back. And the reason for that is that the generative moves of keeping writing, moving forward at maybe, steady pace. It doesn't have to be so fast that you're tripping over yourself, but that you're writing one word after another in a way that it's cogent. It makes sense, right? But that in doing that, you're moving forward. And as soon as you stop and you pause and you reconsider and you hit the backspace and you delete, or you take out 2 or 3 sentences, then you're no longer moving forward. So the feeling of the write at speed, kind of drafting generative mode of being in flow perhaps, or really connecting with the words and kind of just moving things along and getting it out quickly, brain dumping, right? That can be kind of great spontaneous writing and pleasurable. And so we want to foster that during these sessions. And then know that we're going to be spending time going back after the 4-hour article workshop. Then we clean it up. You have to trust that you're going to go back and clean it up, that you have a draft, and then it can take a while, right? That you go through it, you edit it, make sure it says what you want it to say. That avoid the delete button, that is the most controversial advice in this session. If you can, avoid erasing, right? No editing during the session if you can. So trust your post-workshop process to rearrange, revise, and add to your article as you need. This is really about generating new content. So if you want to have a full draft within those 2-hour sessions, don't go into editing mode, just keep generating. And you have to adhere to the timeline and the workshop lead. And so when we say start and stop, that is a requirement. And it can be a little frustrating, as you might imagine. You just really start getting into a role, and then you're just like, and you're told, all right, post some notes on where to pick up again. One of the reasons why we will say post some notes on where to pick up again is so that you have that time to be able to finish up those ideas. Maybe you leave yourself a little, kind of breadcrumb or note on where to pick up again, and just take a breather and a break. And it's important to have those breaks, because if you picture writing consistently at speed for 2 hours intensively, that's a lot. And so what we want is make sure that we're not exhausting people, or we're not binge writing, right? That these are timed, these are sequential sessions that help us build out and generate a text over time. If you can, add your bibliography, your citations, your footnotes post-workshop. If you know that there's something there that you want to cite it, and you can just put it in brackets or just keep moving forward, right? Leave little notes to yourself and just say, add in citation on X, Y, and Z. Those are things that you can add in pretty quickly through the editing phase, right? And being aware of how you're functioning within these sessions, really, really necessary. What I love about CSU Writes events where we come together and collectively kind of connect with our own projects, but together in a space where other people are connecting on their projects, it helps us be just a little bit more aware of, like, how are we working? What are we doing? How are we doing things? And just a reminder, when we build in that 5-minute break, take breaks and breaths as you need. Sometimes we kind of hold our breath when we're writing important things. So just a reminder to take those breaks in the assigned breaks, right, as scheduled. Write for speed. We talked about those techniques of practicing generative writing and then separating it from your editing, right, and 5 minutes on and then 5 minutes off, for editing. But what's really helpful also in that is to have an awareness of non-judgmental kind of writing generation. And that critical mind is the where we start to question, like, is this really what I want to be saying? Or is that the right word? Or, I haven't thought, about this before, but I'm not sure we're going down the right path. And on the one hand, you want to be able to make sure that you're generating in a direction that makes sense. But on the other hand, if you're kind of berating yourself, or who would pick that word, or I know that that's not the right way, and you start to go down the path of a version of self-criticism, just remind yourself that this is non-judgmental writing generation. We're going to generate it out, and it's going to be messy, and it's going to be, inglorious, but we're going to have to go through and clean it up. We'll have the opportunity to do that after that. Afterwards, we'll celebrate whatever our generated draft is among writings and colleagues. If you want to stick around, if you can, we can have some lunch. It's great. It's really fun. And just acknowledge and express gratitude for the collegial support and community that we have here for writing. It's really, really important, I think, for our own health and well-being as folks who are pressured oftentimes by external forces to write a fair amount about areas that are highly specialized. It's really lovely to know that you have a writing community here and that we're grateful for one another. All right, and if you're watching the recording, just register to access the email updates and progress if you haven't already connected and gotten that registration. Otherwise, as you heard me say earlier, I'll be sending out information and follow-up emails. All right. And oops, I should have changed the dates on it. But if you practice, we just know that you'll be asked to be giving Qualtrics feedback. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for some conversation among the folks who are attending live and on Zoom. And let me stop the recording so we can open up for some questions.